we should get going. Thank you so much, Richard. It's wonderful to have you here with us today. You're from Pathway UX Research. Joined Yuki sort of around this time last year, actually, and really pleased to have you here with us today to, I guess, sort of explore, putting community into the development process and hearing all about how best to sort of manage those expectations and make the most out of it, and what the difference can be that you can make. All right, Richard, over to you. Less of me.
Thanks very much for the introduction, and thank you very much to Yuki as well for putting this week on, and I'm really looking forward to some of the talks we have lined up. I'll get started then. And thanks everyone for joining as well. I don't know whether or not I can see the Q&A box, but if someone does use it, then I'll try and find it, or Leo will be able to help me. Hi, I'm Richard, lead design researcher at Pathway UX Research, and I'm here to talk about including your community in the development process as part of Yuki's A Week of Insight into Games 2025. Over the next half an hour or so, we'll run into why doing this can be advantageous. I have some examples of those who are doing this right now or have done it before, and we'll tackle some of the benefits and pitfalls. Obviously, no situation is exactly the same, but lessons can be learned from kind of each one that we do have. And please feel free to kind of fire away with questions in the chat as we go through, and we'll do our best to pick them up. Okay. So I've spent 16 years working in and around games of all types, from sales through user experience and design research. I spent nearly 7 years at Rockstar Games, and most recently I spent a year doing independent design research, and then also moved into the public sector to help run and advise on public engagement and scrutiny in local government, including a recent survey that covered a population of 1.2 million people. I can talk about the communities that I've worked with, researched, or been part of, and I hope to be able to share some of my perspective with you today. And I'll also draw on some of the public sector side of things, because I feel like there's a lot of transferable knowledge between different industries that we can rely on, and a lot of good work is done in the UK overall on engagement with communities. So, a community is the sharing of or having certain attitudes and interests in common with others, in this case, a specific game or hobby. That was the Google definition. It might be slightly different in the Oxford Dictionary or Cambridge Dictionary or so on and so forth. But developers are part of that community, and they have reciprocal relationships with other people in the community as well. So reciprocity is a simple idea from social psychology. If you do something good for someone, they tend to do something good back to you. This creates a social contract in gaming. So when a developer is friendly, transparent, consistent with updates, and so on, the community responds with greater loyalty and cooperation. This can also work in reverse if someone perceives harm is being done to them. So long-term success relies on creating genuine reciprocity with players, and this can be within the kind of a lifespan of a single game, or if you're talking about long-lasting IP or a long-lasting studio, kind of multiple releases as well. Fostering a positive reciprocal relationship is an expected investment. It's not pure altruism, giving with kind of no expectation of reward. It's about reciprocal altruism. The developer constantly provides valuable gifts like quality content or clear communication, which establishes a fair expectation of return. And that can be seen in loyalty, constructive feedback, word of mouth marketing, and continued sales. It's important to understand that no matter whether or not you are intentional about this relationship, so long as you have a community, this relationship does exist in some way. We can draw parallels to the way a friendship relies on two-way communication and might wane or become strained if it becomes one-sided or irregular. I'm going to go on to talk a little bit about kind of community inclusion, well, quite a lot about community inclusion. And it's important to think about community inclusion not just as getting members of the community into the studio working on the game alongside you. That is kind of one level, the most extreme level. But another level, kind of a more passive approach, is just releasing information to the community so they're aware of what's going on with the game, roadmaps and things like that. We can look at community engagement as either a finite or an infinite, which gives us a great way to think about long-term success. So finite engagement has fixed kind of player base, set rules, a clear end goal, for example, things like launching a game. If a studio treats the community like this, the relationship often ends or fades after launch. So one example of this is Disco Elysium, and it can be seen as a very well-reviewed game that received limited updates and was really successful around its launch, but its success was really focused around its original release and its subsequent reception. On the infinite engagement side, the goal is to successfully keep the relationship going indefinitely. Here, community work is a continuous and more program level effort. If the relationship is prioritized over time limited project goals, then trust and resilience within the community builds in the brand and the IP and so on and so forth. Setbacks like delays or bad updates can become more temporary and not kind of existential threats to the brand because fundamental trust remains. Old school RuneScape is an example of this as an MMORPG now 13 years running with a continuous set of updates. And it was originally based off a much loved version of the original game. So, kind of in a way, the ultimate way of including the community by understanding that this version of the game that they resurrected was one that was really important to a core set of their player base. Um, if you do a quick Google search after this or now, you can take a look at their polling charter, which sets out how they will engage with their players and give them a say in what updates are produced and added to the game. And this is an example of community co-creation, which I'll come back to later. It's really important throughout any kind of involvement with the community and throughout the entire process of developing a game to know your goals and limitations. At the indie developer end, those might be more resource based, hitting the first milestone, making things work as efficiently as possible. And at the larger scale, protecting your brand and IP and staying true to your design principles are really important. Understanding how far your resources can stretch is a keystone in good decision making. And while infinite might sound like the best option, what is best is really based on what is achievable for you. And infinite engagement by its nature is more complex than finite engagement. Something that I won't touch on much today is user-generated content, providing tools within the game to allow players themselves to create content for the wider community. And this is a really important part of infinite engagement, but not so much part of the development process as the community is developing things for themselves. So, the benefits of community inclusion. A strong two-way community is a massive asset. When players feel connected and included, they stay engaged longer, leading to better retention and provide the deep, critical insights needed to make games better. Furthermore, an active community generates content, videos, guides, memes, things like that organically bring in new players, turning the player base into a low-cost and effective marketing engine in and of itself. A successful reciprocal relationship is a continuous loop of giving and receiving. Developers must consistently offer dedication, honesty, and a willingness to engage. And this is most clear in live service games, where the community conversation constantly shapes the future content roadmap. We can start to structure how this can be done by kind of the developer input or action, the community output and reciprocal action, and the potential business benefit. And I say potential because there's no guarantee that these will work, but there are lots of examples of them working. The first up is communication. Taking a transparent and open approach can help to encourage trust and reduce toxicity, in turn aiding hype management and reputation. Then, continuous content updates. This can be more regular rather than a constant stream, so quarterly or biannually or something like that. But the community is likely to respond with less churn and more engagement, especially around those periods of release, leading to better revenue and long-term viability. Social media is always encouraging content creators to post regularly and sometimes in very predictable ways, and this follows a similar principle as it gives the community an idea of how to act and when to act. Structured feedback and playtesting, providing the real player insights and validation of designs or assumptions. This can greatly reduce the risk involved in development and help make better decisions about what to prioritize. Policy enforcement or fair play. And this is policy generated by the developer. It helps players manage their expectations and self-police as active members of the community know what is expected of them. And it can help retain your core audience and enhance player safety. And then finally, community co-development or co-creation. This can take many forms, but ultimately allows the developer to gather support and investment directly from the community. Developers who really buy into this approach might be able to get assistance or funding directly from their community before release. Not all of these are appropriate all the time. Some are better catering for finite games, others for infinite. Some are better for small scale and others large. And we'll talk more about the pitfalls alongside some of the real examples that I found for you in a moment. This structure shows how developer actions can trigger a reciprocal player response that can lead to measurable business benefits. And you can take a screenshot if you want to refer back to it. I'll give you a moment to do that whilst I have a quick sip of my tea as my mouth's getting kind of dry. Okay. Okay, so crowdfunding co-creation. I also work with games in the tabletop industry, and this is really common to source funding and support through crowdfunding. It's a great example of commonplace direct community co-creation. So for projects like the 2025 tabletop game Quest Snakes, pre-campaign community building was crucial for securing funding and development support. This model has also been used, although less frequently, in video games. In 2014, the nascent IP Kingdom Come Deliverance also started out in this way. So involving the community strategically through co-creation and especially crowdfunding co-creation is really important. And it's really important to be intentional about how you go about doing it. So you can do it via thorough playtesting. So when you have this kind of level of support and the amount of people that might have bought into your crowdfunding campaign, you have a resource that you can make use of. So you can test mechanics with a diverse group of players who have already bought in some way, from hardcore gamers to casual family members, and ensure the game is accessible and engaging. You're also able to gamify the design in a way. So Quest Snakes kept excitement high by letting backers vote on unlocked stretch goals within a 48-hour window, giving them a direct say in the final product. You can also drive value. So fan requests for new classes and expansions help the team introduce appealing and value-packed bundles, successfully raising their average pledge value, which was necessary to make the initiative profitable. And that was gained directly through that kind of initial crowdfunding. And then design perks. So Kingdom Come Deliverance offered associate producer design credits and invited specific users to visit the studio and meet the design director during development. They also offered special forum access for backers, which they leveraged for community opinion and support. And we'll talk a bit more about another example of this in a moment. This is a fully committed approach. And it is inadvisable in some cases. So, for example, established IP with significant existing stakeholder investment and community expectations. These pre-existing needs and expectations can directly conflict with what is created by or suggested by the crowdfunding community. For example, an existing stakeholder may require something specific to be delivered by a certain date, and that can be irrespective entirely of the community buy-in. And there's also the risk of spending a lot of time and money on a co-creation campaign at the expense of actual work on the game. So there's a resource trade-off in taking this approach. An alternative that doesn't rely so heavily on direct community investment might be an early access release, especially for small to mid-sized developers, as this still enables playtesting and value finding, but means that you don't have to spend so much time thinking about the campaign and relying on it. So we'll talk about how to kind of scale community inclusion using some examples of those different ways to do it I outlined previously. And we'll start off with kind of indies or an example from the indie size. So the biggest challenge in scaling community strategy to fit the size and is to fit the size and resources of the studio. As a studio grows, the relationship changes from being based on personal connection to relying on systematic management and governance. Being upfront about the limitations faced is key in making the best fit decision here, in time, finances, expertise, technology, and relationships. We'll take a look at an example. We'll take a look at examples of community inclusions at 3 different levels. For small teams and solo developers, like Greg Stixon of Manor Lords, the entire community strategy rested on the developer's personal authenticity and radical transparency that he had with the community he built. The developer acted as the face of the brand, and honest communication provided a critical buffer against criticism as development was ongoing. The game, developed primarily by one person, succeeded in early access in part because the developer was open and honest about the progress, even when updates involved core code refactors or delays. This personal vulnerability built a deep trust with the core members of the community, creating a reputation shield of sorts. Small studios can use low cost, consistent, organic content like simple work in progress snippets to build superfans before launch. And to help with this, Manor Lords had a dedicated Discord server to allow direct communication, at times asking for historical and creative support, as well as providing votes to help with decision making. Another more broad example, maybe a more traditional example of this, would just be something like dev blogs or dev diaries that are released regularly. So this is an example of a vote that Greg put out to the Discord, and it received over 40,000 responses. The focus of the poll is quite broad and gives an insight into what the community would like to see first. Items like this can be used to help course correct or uncover strategic items to prioritize. However, take care not to ask about things that you cannot do or what the impact of asking a question might be, as the simple act of asking can actually shift community mindsets in and of itself. So here, he asked what the best goal for early access was in 2024, and it came back with a reasonably strong response for AI cities and diplomacy, which he was then able to kind of incorporate into all of the other bits of information that he had in order to kind of help prioritize the decisions on where to spend his resources. The development of Manor Lords also included a subset of players who would playtest and discuss the latest builds. Although organic, the community was small enough and the process structured in a way that it could be filtered and managed by Greg and by, I think it's Hooded Horse, who are the publishers of the game. At this scale, the approach is also very agile and responsive, as you could just release a build, and the players themselves who are already invested and interested in the game can just get to work playtesting, discussing, and then you can immediately get some feedback on it. Through this Discord, Greg was also able to find suitable interested freelancers at competitive rates and outsource small items of work for free to the Discord community, like bits of creative writing, accuracy checks, and inspiration drivers, amongst other things. And this really made certain members of the community feel like they were not only contributing by playing and discussing things, but also actually adding things that ended up in the game in the end. A critical pitfall here, and for many indie studios and studios across kind of all the different scales, is scope creep. A vocal and positive community can generate so many great ideas that a small team feels very pressured to expand the game beyond their resources, especially if they're more successful than they anticipated being. This can lead to burnout or spend too much time servicing their community at the expense of game creation. The solution isn't silence, but proactively communicating the core objectives from the start and being honest about which features, however good, must be excluded to ensure the game is viable. If you're successful and continue to grow in terms of resources and community, it's also important to think about when more structured systems or dedicated community managers are required to help manage the community. For medium-sized studios, especially those running live service games, they face the challenge of volume. Typically having dedicated community managers, but limited capacity compared to AAA teams. The focus shifts from personal connection to systemizing the feedback loop. This adds some distance, but ultimately you're not going to have as direct connection once you get to a huge scale with like thousands of players as you are with maybe hundreds of players. No Man's Sky launched to intense criticism due to a perceived lack of promised features. The game's subsequent success is a prime example of a medium-sized studio using player feedback and leveraging a reciprocal relationship to completely overhaul a live service title. By listening to the community, the developers, Hello Games, were able to turn the game around, reducing player churn and creating good news that helps spread the word to more players, growing the community. Incorporating player suggestions has been shown to boost community's trust, with a study from MoldStud indicating that player retention can increase by 30% when developers listen and respond to feedback. Let's take a look at some of the stats from SteamDB showing how things have changed for No Man's Sky over time. The first is reviews. Back around the release in December 2016, the game had over twice as many negative reviews as positive, 25,000 positive reviews to 56,000 negative reviews. Following the red line along the bottom, I don't know if you can see my mouse, but I'm hovering the cursor around over it. following the red line on the bottom, we can see that these negative reviews remain very stable over the lifetime of the game. And following the blue line, we can see, especially from around halfway through 2018, which unfortunately is just hidden behind this bit where it's telling you the number of reviews in 2016, we can see there's a steady climb. That takes us to September of this year, where there are now 313,000 positive reviews to only 59,000 negative. So there were only 3,000 new negative reviews added in the same time as 300,000 positive reviews over the course of, looks like 7 years, 8 years. The second is player numbers, where we're specifically looking at retention. So we have spikes. This starts at the end of 2017, where the game was at rock bottom in terms of player count and had about 1,500 players each day. You can see the spikes and then highlighted letters or numbers, which mark major releases containing items that were important to the community. And almost immediately following the first major release here, you can see that there was an increase in player retention. And this, although it looks small in comparison to the spikes, was an increase of about 300% from about 1,500 players per day to about 6,000 players per day. Each release since then has built on this, with the most recent anniversary update right over here, very recently, I think September or so, marked a new high with around 30,000 players each day currently. And obviously we're coming off of the back end of a spike here, but you've gone from 1,500 players to 30,000 players. And following this trend line, we'll probably expect around 20,000 players per day, which is a massive increase. The core difficulty for medium-sized studios is filtering the strategic value or the signal from the raw discussions or the noise. So the community discussions are often driven by fringe or highly vocal groups, which can mislead development efforts, kind of the vocal minority. Mitigation strategies must be analytical to help you combat this. So you can start off by frequency mapping. This is systematically tracking how often similar feedback appears across a variety of channels and customers. You can also use impact weighting, so assigning greater value or greater strategic value to feedback coming from high value or high retention players or specific market segments you want to grow. This prevents resources being wasted on feedback from non-core segments. Different platform types also provide different types of information. So for example, Steam reviews often focus more on game mechanics, while YouTube comments are often more driven by visuals due to the nature of the platform, with Steam giving you direct access to the game and YouTube being limited to the video content. Developers must consider these platform differences when considering feedback. Structured input. Using targeted surveys can significantly increase the effectiveness of input. For example, targeting that player segment you need to hear from most and only asking questions about things you have the ability to change and moving from anecdotal data to standardized data. Developments in AI here may be able to help, as you can use it to assist with processing a bunch of raw and unfiltered information and greatly reduce the amount of time a person needs to spend doing it. However, always make sure that what you're uploading to is secure. The information you're uploading is not confidential, and human oversight is used to make the checks. Just going to take another pause for a sip of tea. Okay, so now on to larger developers or the AAA scale. A studio cannot rely on personal connections with tens of thousands to millions of players. It's just not possible. The reciprocal contract must move to kind of a more systemic reliability, brand integrity, and ultimately safety of this many people. The publisher's primary reciprocal input is maintaining a fair, fun, and safe environment fueled by sustainable hype for the loyal majority. This eventually requires a strict policy enforcement against disruptive behavior, such as cheating or gaining an unfair advantage, or griefing, intentionally annoying others. Enforcement is a non-negotiable operating cost, often requiring tools to review voice and text chat to protect the core audience. These are, of course, important areas regarding the Online Safety Act too. Meanwhile, feedback is continuously gathered via dedicated channels in order to structure the relationship between the developer and the consumer and ensure that that two-way communication is maintained. A major pitfall of this is the requirement for perfection. The amount of scrutiny that major developers and publishers come under is on a different magnitude to smaller studios, along with the financial and human risks associated with it. If personal data is lost, trust and safety mechanisms stop working, or services suspended, large numbers of players and staff can suffer, so it's vital to treat these areas as a priority. They will also need to have tools to manage and interact with the community in different ways, to our other examples, but accounting for the different scale and scrutiny. Methods are likely to become even more structured and reliant on dedicated specialists in order to achieve this. Another critical pitfall here is hype backlash caused by expectation delta. And I know that's a bit of jargon. So by expectation delta, I mean the amount of hype and its trajectory. You can always ask questions like, is it sustainable? Is it managed? Are expectations rock solid or flexible? Massive titles carry huge long-term fan anticipation, and the smallest perceived failure can cause brand damage that might impact the IP well into the future. Consider the case of Cyberpunk 2077, whose hype built to a fever pitch shortly before release, only to suffer criticism from players and investors due to extremely high and unmanaged expectations. This was eventually overcome by following a similar path to Hello Games and No Man's Sky, where they used regular updates and clear communication to rebuild trust, including things like roadmaps to set community expectations on when things will be fixed. But avoiding that at the largest scale is the lesson here, as some players will remember the challenges surrounding the release until at least the next major title come out, and that may impact the sales and reputation of the company. Rockstar's use of calculated timing aids them here. For example, announcing a delay for GTA 6 just before releasing a mega hype trailer. This timing allowed the fan base a head start to absorb the disappointment and get used to the longer wait before rewarding them with something that was really hotly anticipated. By also framing the delay as necessary for a high standard of quality, the studio turned a negative news item into a reinforcement of its brand promise, and this moves the relationship beyond simple honesty to sophisticated public relations. As such, an important step in the development and release of any game is creating and leveraging hype, being able to generate interest and drive existing or potential players where you want them to go. This is a form of community inclusion, as all of this hype is generated by how and what you release to the players in your community. It forms part of a natural cycle where the key role of the developer or publisher is to curate and manage those expectations through how and what you release, and otherwise ensure the expectation delta is not out of control. Remember that trust is something that builds over time via a positive reciprocal relationship with your community, and it is a precious resource that is hard to achieve and difficult to rebuild once it's lost. I'm not expecting you to take in all of this information immediately. I will be going through it, but here's a breakdown of what I've just been speaking about. So, small or indie studios can be agile and use the small size of their community and relative lack of expectation to directly communicate with their players. And by lack of expectation, I mean there will certainly be members of communities that will expect a lot in every case, but it's just the number of people with those expectations and how far those expectations travel. Take care not to burn out by defining clear objectives and prioritizing effectively. Medium studios are able to leverage their existing community and success to promote regular engagement and harvest insights from a diverse array of players in a more structured way, making sure to filter out noise through a variety of analytical strategies. Large studios need to maintain their hard-earned status and take care of a much bigger community, setting out clear expectations and handling hype in a sophisticated manner by investing appropriate resources and thinking strategically in order to assist in navigating community inclusion. And please feel free to take a screenshot for later if you want to. I'll give you a moment to do that. Okay. So managing community segmentation. By community segments, I mean different people within your community, different groups of people within your community. And that can be formed on demographics or other items that are purely focused on the product. So game development often involves understanding and handling complex community segments. For example, casual or competitive players. These begin to reveal themselves as the community becomes more established and the game grows. We can draw lessons from highly regulated fields like public sector co-design, which deal with complex stakeholder issues. Citizen engagement in the public sector strengthens governance and is a source of innovative solutions. And the use of digitally gamified co-creation in urban design has shown that making participation fun and engaging motivates diverse stakeholders. So this specifically talking about the gamified co-creation has some parallels to crowdfunding, as the design perks and kind of the inclusion of the community and decisions that are made about the game is gamified in a way. The key takeaway here is building process trust. When a disagreement on the final outcome, for example, a feature, is inevitable, stakeholders must trust the process used to reach that outcome. Public sector models suggest two practical structures for developers and one thing to avoid. The first is structured subgroups. Identifying your segments is an important part of this as well. So instead of one vast forum, so we're talking about maybe at the indie level where everyone can contribute all the time, create smaller, focused, or drafting subgroups, it's called in the public sector, but I'm sure we can come up with something a little bit more engaging than that, for niche topics. For example, accessibility and competitive balance. Run frequent and shorter engagement with your players. So using shorter, regular updates or meetings instead of large and infrequent releases. This keeps everyone informed of the process, minimizing the expectation gap and ensuring players feel like they have regular input. An example of this in video games are short in-game surveys introduced by Fortnite, which appear within the UI of the game itself and can be responded to through the game directly. And then lastly, avoiding kick me questions. If there's a difficult problem that you can't address in the way that your community has expressed it would like, don't ask them about it, because it will create expectation around a subject you're unable to make headway on. That doesn't mean don't do anything about it. Instead, focus on things that you can change or identify an underlying issue around why something has risen to the surface in order to uncover a potentially different avenue of approach that you can do something about. It's also important to mention at this point that safeguarding the interests of yourself, your staff, and your IP as it develops is really important. Ensure that appropriate steps are taken to make sure that the correct material is shared or otherwise secured. The right questions are asked and the best responses are given to the community. It's a key part of involving your community in a positive reciprocal relationship. To summarize the kind of benefits of reciprocity, the reciprocal relationship is fragile and it can break when promises are missed or expectations dramatically exceed reality, leading to intense and damaging backlash. Community inclusion is a core business strategy. By embracing reciprocity and understanding your focus on finite or infinite engagement, studios of any size can maximize player retention, gain essential insights, and reduce brand risk. Be realistic about what you can achieve, consistent in your approach, avoid repeat engagement with players on something you can't fix, and put safeguarding and security of your team, intellectual property, and community first. Today was an example of the sort of competitor analysis and desk research that Pathway UX Research can offer, and I hope it can be of some use to you. Thank you so much for your time today, and I'm very happy to answer any questions as best as I can. And I'll hand back over to Leo to sort that.
Fantastic. Well, thank you so much, Richard. That was fascinating. An awful lot of really, really key, important things to consider there, especially when I mean, I suppose the communities are such a valuable sort of tool and resource, but also, it's a customer base as well, and it's all quite sort of joined up, and it's quite hard to sort of separate some of those things sometimes, I suppose. Um, I mean, one of the questions that I had, and by all means, anyone in the chat, please jump in and ask. You mentioned sort of filtering out some of the noise. I mean, sentiment analysis is quite tricky sometimes, and obviously, you can have those vocal minorities that are sort of pushing for something that they really want, that actually, the vast majority of people in a community aren't interested in, but also aren't speaking up against. I mean, how would you? Are there any ways to sort of think about that in terms that are sort of constructive or and contribute towards the development process? Do you reckon?
Yeah, for sure. And you are totally right. I mean, players will just say what they want to say because they're not working for the company. They have their own opinions. They have a completely different perspective to developers. And a lot of that is ultimately noise. I mean, even just down to in the middle of a discussion about a beta test or something, people just going off topic and talking about, oh, I like this or this is cool. Some of that can be useful, some of it definitely not. I'd say there are kind of four things you can do, some of which I mentioned in terms of how to address that as part of, I think it was No Man's Sky. That could be frequency mapping. So how often does it appear? Where does it appear? So if you're seeing it often in a variety of different places, it's more likely to be affecting a broader segment of the community. The second is kind of that impact mapping. So things that are more important, things that have a bigger impact. In quality assurance, we use the kind of term A class, B class, C class, things that are real blockers to what you want your players to be doing are more important than things that are not necessarily. Um, there's also keeping to your core objectives, which is kind of an adjacent thing. If you have goals for what the game should be, what your resources are able to extend to, then you can use that information to help feed into the feedback that you're getting, and you can immediately start discarding things that you know are not going to be possible. And then lastly is having an idea, and this is kind of something as communities mature, an idea of what your player segments actually are, so you can start to tell where some of this information is coming from, whether or not it's a specific segment communicating it, whether or not it's coming from uh, a variety of different segments in your community.
Yeah, no, that makes a lot of sense. I really appreciate that. That's really, really helpful. Okay, fantastic. Well, yeah, unless anyone has any other question, I did have one other question about the Manor Lords example that you brought up, and I don't know whether this strays a little bit too far off the topic, but nevertheless, it's kind of interesting to me. I mean, you mentioned the community sort of contributing almost as if they were sort of contributing for free, doing a little bit of work here and there. I mean, obviously, in an ideal world, people would be sort of credited for this. Is that generally the case in a lot of these games?
I think it is, especially at that kind of lower end. It can be quite a difficult process to manage because if you get like 1,000 people trying to contribute, then it might be difficult to kind of maintain a list of all of those people. But in Manor Lord's example, people were given specific kind of perks on the Discord server. They were given specific pieces of access, like that kind of better access or beta access. And I think in the game's credits, there's like a general thank you to the community for the help. And as I mentioned with Kingdom Come Deliverance and their kind of Kickstarter, they also provided specific associate producer credits and invited people to the studio within their game. Um, and I suppose the definition or title or whatever you want to give to people based on their contribution is completely within the hands of the developers to decide. But I think that associate producer title was given to people who contributed something like $5,000 to the Kickstarter, and people who contributed a great deal to that kind of private forum that was only available for pledges as well. So there are certainly ways that you can credit the community, and obviously I would advocate for doing so. Crediting people for their work is always really rewarding for them and for the developer in the end.
Yeah, no, absolutely. You're absolutely right. That makes a lot of sense. Fantastic. Well, Richard, thank you so much for your time today. It's been really, really interesting, really, really useful stuff to for everyone to hear about. If anyone has any other questions, I guess your details are on the screen just there for people to get in touch and connect with you. Um, but yeah, I really appreciate your time this morning, and thank you so much for everyone that's joined. We'll probably bring it to a close there, but I'll stay on.
Thank
All
you,
right.
Leo. Yeah, and please do send me questions if you have any. Please feel free to just reach out, and I'll do my best to get back to you. And it is nearly afternoon, so I hope everyone has
Yes,
a lovely
yes, it
lunch.
is. Thank you so much, everyone. Really appreciate it. Like I